So welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Tapring Paquato, president of ADDSTEAM, and I am thrilled for this topic. It's something that I hear about a lot is how do you write for general audiences? What's good writing? Is there science writing? So I'm really excited for our guest today. That is the expert in science writing and can share a lot of his wisdom with us. Again, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to pass it to our Director of Programs, Annabelle.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I think I've met most of you, but those of you that are new to ADDSTEAM, welcome. I'm Annabelle, and I put together professional development programs for our community. And today's presenter is Dr. Ted Yu. I'm really excited to have him hosting this session. Like Tapring said, it's going to be about science writing and also maybe how to present your scientific work to a general audience. I will also include his LinkedIn and Instagram on the chat. Encourage you to follow him. He is the founder of Brain Public. It's an organization that brings together a community of STEM students and professionals to share their scientific work in a fun and social format. So definitely follow him. And a little bit about Dr. Yu. He earned a PhD in material science from the University of California, Irvine, and he was also a writer for NPR's radio show, The Lowdown on Science. And he is currently a principal scientist at Machina Cognita Technologies. So welcome, Ted, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Tapring. Thank you, Annabelle. Excuse me. Oh, I got coffee. Yeah, that
That's
weird
okay.
coffee throat. Thank you for that gracious introduction. I'm gonna get this started. So I actually saves me a bit of trouble introducing myself. So that is great. Okay. There we go. Can you guys see me okay? Great. Looks like I am broadcasting. All right. So, yeah, as all these wonderful folks have said, my name is Ted. I've been doing this for a while. Excuse me. I've been doing this for a while. I knew Tapring and Annabelle. I was introduced through some mutual friends in the science communication sphere. And then I was told hey, they're looking for someone to help teach sort of this stuff. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to do that. Um, so that's the idea. There we go. Okay, so here's how this talk is going to work. I'm just going to do the introduction. We're going to go over what all this work is about, stuff you want to think about. And then we're going to go into what I think are the two most important things that you can learn in science communication. And that is, what do you do before you even start this business, period? And this thing I call the narrative trajectory. And we'll go over what all of those mean. And then we're going to close it off with just a little bit of tips and tricks. There's only so much we can go over and so much a human brain is even physically capable of absorbing in a short period of time. So I figured, hey, we'll just go with just what is really, really important, in my opinion. Okay, I'd like to kick off the introduction section with a quote. In a long form presentation, you should establish your credentials early. We're going to get real meta from the get-go because I know this is an hour-long presentation, hour-ish or so, right? You're going to want to spend some time talking about hey, who is this person sitting in front of everybody? Why are they important? Why should I listen to them? Because you're asking a lot when you have people listening to you for a long period of time. So you should be gracious and be like, hey, here's who I am. This is what I do, and this is why I think it's important. As I mentioned, a lot of this work has already been done, which is, thankfully saves me a lot of time, but I'll just go over this briefly so I can demonstrate what this sort of looks like. Okay, as it was mentioned, I really cut my teeth in Lowdown on Science. There, I was a writer, I was an editor, and I was a managing editor during my time in grad school. So how this worked was at UCI, there's a program where you can be a writer for this radio show. And what it is, it's like a minute and 30 long segment that shows up in, morning in the NPR, across the NPR family of stations. And it's our job as the graduate students, people who are scientists, to break through the literature, look for new papers that have come out that are really cool, and then see about how can we break that down into something that's digestible and understandable to a general audience in just a minute and 30 seconds. During that time, I wrote, I think, 30 scripts. And because I was an editor, I had my fingerprints over like 100. So I've been doing this for a while. And then also in grad school, as it was mentioned, I helped found Brain Public. So that is the latest iteration of something called Brews and Brains, which I did not found back in grad school. So that whole idea there was, hey, all of my buddies who are in and out of that also were interested in science communication. Let's give you guys a place to practice. We just rented out, well, not rented. There was a hotel restaurant patio that was very kind enough to just let us use that space for free, as long as we kept buying their food, which we did. It was a great time. And they would give like 10-minute talks about their research specifically. And during that, and we would coach, my partner and we would coach people how to do that as well. I also have a podcast. It's a little weird saying I have a podcast because I have not been posting any new episodes since the pandemic. There are episodes in the pipe. I just need to find a good editor who will help me out so I can do these things, without cutting into my day job, right? But yeah, and the whole idea was like, hey, how do you humanize the scientists? There's like what they do. Again, kind of like in the Brews and Brains and the Brain Public fashion, please don't dumb down what you do. We want to learn what you do, but we do have to make it digestible for people who aren't doing what you're doing. And that's the eternal struggle of this thing, right? And then at the same time, hey, please tell us about yourself as a scientist. And of course, finally, my day job. I don't do this full time. My full-time job is I am a scientist over at Machine and Cognita Technologies, and I do things for Uncle Sam, and we're going to leave it at that, unfortunately. Okay, let's talk about science communication. What is this problem to begin with? It goes something like this. You know something. And then someone over there, maybe it's your buddy, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's an audience, they would like to know that thing. Either they benefit from knowing that thing, or they don't yet know they could benefit. They'd like to know that thing. Now, that thing, it's hard. You need a lot of technical expertise to understand it. Maybe there's a lot of other knowledge surrounding it that you need to understand. Maybe you only understand it because you've been working on it for like years, right? So how do you bridge that gap? Especially when, like I said before, human brains, man, we have an attention span of like 15 minutes or so, and then we're already checked out. That's just how people are. How do you solve this problem? And what that problem could look like specifically, it could be a lot of things. Oh, actually, I want to go back. I want to talk about this a little bit. One of the things I'm going to mention is that, hey, definitely look at good examples of science communication. What you see here, this picture is the Voyager record, The Sounds of the Earth, it's called. Fortunate. If we have time, maybe during a Q&A session, I can go over why this is so cool, but definitely I'm going to assign homework. Go look up why this is so cool. This is like, I think, apex science communication is what that's what that is. Okay, but that's not the only form it can take, as I said. That could be, this problem could take the form of like, hey, I'm presenting at a conference. I wrote a paper. I'd like to present it to my peers within the field. They're experts, but they don't know what I know. How do you do that? YouTube channels, there's a lot of YouTube channels aimed at the general audience that are very good at showing off specific things in science. Again, not dumbing down so that you're lying, but at the same time, simplifying a little bit so it's digestible to the audience. Now, if you don't know what these verbs are, if you haven't checked out this YouTube channel yet, I'm going to say there was no homework assigned for you to be here, but wow, you really found a way to not do your homework. Please check them out. One of the best ways to learn how to do this is to watch good and go through good examples of science communication. And in a nutshell, is definitely qualifies. Um, Excuse me, I am recovering from COVID, so I might be coughing a lot. Okay, so another form it could take, company-wide technical updates. I've had to do this a lot. Even people that are familiar with what you do, they're still going to need that walkthrough to kind of build them up into new topics. And finally, oh yeah, and this is one of my favorite talks that I've given. Uh, you can just explain something really cool to a friend, and that is also science communication. So how the story goes, a dear friend of mine, back a few years ago when James Webb first launched, and all those really amazing pictures are coming out. Yeah, he was like, "Oh, dang, this is so cool. Why don't we just grab a bunch of our nerd buddies and just have a few drinks and start a party and just, celebrate this monumental technological achievement. Oh, by the way, like you're a physics guy. Can you like tell us what this all like really means in the grand scheme of things, and you explain what all this really is?" I was like, yeah, sure. And so I organized like a 10-minute talk about just to friends. It was very low impact. And I was able to talk about a lot of things, and we all had a lot of fun. One of my fondest memories in science communication, in fact. Okay, so we're going to learn to do this thing. We're going to go over that together. And here's how this presentation is going to kind of work. What we're going to talk about can apply to writing and presenting. There's going to be a slight presentation bent to it. That's only because I am presenting. If we're having like a writing workshop, probably would have done it as a more writing bent. That's just kind of how it's going to go. Like I said, there's two important things. That is, what do you do before we even start? And what I call the narrative trajectory. This isn't the only way to think about science communication, but this is how I think about science communication. And that's what we're going to go over. Now, you're going to be given an example of these things, and it's going to go sort of in this order. I'm going to give you kind of the theory behind what to do, why this works from like a human level perspective. I'm going to give an example of what that looks like, and then we're going to review that and kind of go through what the lessons to take away are. So in fact, I'm going to tell you, this is the next meta level lesson, by the way. I'm going to tell you when we are taking off the theory hat, putting on the example hat, and then that comes off and we're going to take on the lesson hat. Did you notice how I physically, like, I don't have a hat on my head, but I am taking a hat off my head and putting another hat on. So little visual cues like that, because people generally learn very visually, helps get them from point A to point B a little smoother. So those are some things you can employ. All right. Opening up with another quote in this section before you do anything. When I first started college, my old English professor, I don't even remember her name at this point, she said something very significant I haven't forgotten to this day, and that is, you never not communicate. And what that means is that if you are not intentional with your speech, you will say what you do not intend. You are communicating all the time, whether you are conscious of it or not. Your body language is doing something, people are observing something that you do, you're always saying something. And if you don't take the time to like really craft that message, when your job is to send out a crafted message, you're going to be saying a lot of things that you did not mean to say. It's just how it goes. Now, how you figure out what to say, we all probably know the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why. Who is probably one of the most important things. You want to do that intelligence gathering beforehand, and ask, hey, who is your audience? Is it in a conference setting? Are they experts? Are they peers in my field? Is it a general audience? Maybe people who are not familiar with what you're doing? Or something like, or is it somewhere in that spectrum, right? You want to know where your audience is, and that's what you want to target. Once you know, because that's going to determine kind of like your floor for your vocabulary. What, when, and where, I'm going to kind of lump them together. If it is a conference versus if it is like a talk, or if it is a talk with your friends, those are all very different contexts and therefore different tones. You're going to want to know how to set that tone beforehand. And of course, know your logistics, know where it is, know when to show up, don't be late, because that's just going to stress you out real bad. And then finally, the question to ask is, why are you here and why is your audience here? You want to get clear for yourself what it is that you actually have to teach and what benefit is there to the science that's being done. I'm going to break this down a little bit further. Okay, the first one, like I said, this is the very first thing you want to ask. And in fact, when I was reached out by Annabelle over email, we had this initial call like, hey, who's going to be on here? I want to know. That way I can set what I'm going to have to teach. So those are simple questions like age, how old are they? Are they going to be like high school? Are they going to be adults? Are they going to be like working adults or something like that? What is their educational background? How broad is it? Is it like in conferences, is it going to be very narrow? General audience is going to be very broad. And what level of technical background do they have? This is, again, the intelligence gathering that you're going to want to do before you do anything. So you may have heard of this concept of the lowest common denominator. I actually don't like it. It is not mathematically precise, actually. Really, you're talking about the greatest common divisor. The idea is, hey, I'm going to start with some basic ideas in my introduction. Then we're going to build up in complexity and go into what I really want to talk about. And then we're going to talk about why this research is important to everybody. Where you start is going to depend on your audience. So if your audience, for example, doesn't know how, let's say, for example, I want to talk about my work that I do today, which I'm not going to, which I can't, because I can vaguely tell you I work in radio. If I wanted to talk to an audience about radio, I'll have to think like, okay, so the general population maybe understands how to work the dials in their car. So I'll have to kind of build that up a little bit. People that are experts, though, I can just go right into it, right? That floor determines how much jargon you can use. We're going to talk about that slide explicitly a little bit. But again, jargon is the industry-specific vocabulary within a specific field. We'll have a lot of words about that going up. But the basic structure goes something like this. Again, like I said, basic, introduction, here's what we're doing, complexity goes up, and then finally you're going to get to what we're going to talk about. All right. Theory cap comes off. Example hat comes on. Cool. It'll go like this. I'm going to present a slide. I will tell you if it is a non-technical audience or if it is a technical audience. And in this case, it's going to be about glucose sensing. It is something I've done before. All right. Here's how we go. If you're a diabetic, you've probably seen one of these devices before. This is a glucose meter. You have to prick your finger, you draw some blood, then you squeeze it into like this little test strip, and this machine tells you how much glucose is in your body. But like, how does all of that work? Turns out it's really hard to do because there's a lot of things swimming around in blood. So the problem is like this. You imagine a bowl of chili. I personally like my chili a little spicy, so I'll put in some chili flakes in there, right? So imagine taking a spoonful and your job is to count how many pepper flakes are in that chili, just off of that one spoonful. And I'm not talking about like the pepper flakes that you put in on top of your pizza, nice and big. I'm talking about like finely ground, like paprika or something like that. It's a really hard problem because you have to sit there and like count individual ones. But in glucose sensing, you want to do that in real time. You don't have the time to sit there and count. The chili that is blood has over 40,000 ingredients in it, and those are hormones, vitamins, minerals, all sorts of different proteins, enzymes, dead bits of cells, other chemicals like water and all that kind of stuff. And you're asking me, like, you're saying, like, how do we fish out just the cayenne pepper? I also put in like the paprika. I also put in cayenne and stuff like that in here, right? Like, it's a really hard problem. But if you could find a way to just make those peppers glow in the dark, it'd be a little easier because you could just turn off the lights and that'd be easier to count because you can ignore everything else that way. So the question becomes, hey, can you make glucose glow in the dark? Turns out the answer is no, but we have other things that we can do. So there is this enzyme, and enzymes are proteins that their job is to eat one thing. And in this case, we use glucose oxidase. No, we call it GOX for short. It only eats glucose. And one of those byproducts is hydrogen peroxide. So now it is actually much easier to make hydrogen peroxide glow in the dark. You just stick a wire into your body and then you read that electrical signal. That's how that goes. So this picture here, it's kind of demonstrating what it looks like. That enzyme, if you take a look at it under a powerful enough microscope, it is literally like a Pac-Man. So it's often drawn as a Pac-Man. It's very fun in this industry. We'll consume that glucose, and now we can measure something, one of its byproducts. Okay, that was the non-technical one. We're going to move on to the technical, but someone with a, maybe scientific background, but they don't have that, they don't know about biosensing. Okay, so I want you to imagine trying to, like a bowl of chili. I like my chili spicy, so I put pepper in it. Now, you just take one bowl of chili and your job is to count individual pepper flakes in there. Given that chili has a lot of ingredients in it, it's very difficult to count just one thing. And the same thing is going to be true for blood. The human metabolite database has over 40,000 entries in it, and that lists hormones and proteins, enzymes, nutrients, and all sorts of other chemicals that make up this ridiculous chili that is blood. So how do you go in and target just glucose? Because you can't directly sample an analyte. That's actually really difficult to do. So modern biosensing uses this three-component trick. And that it goes something like this. So you know what you want to target, you want to sense. That is, and you find a bioagent that selectively interacts with that thing that you want to look at. In this case, sugar, right? And that bioagent is painted on top of a transducer. So when you have your analyte that's swimming around in your body, it interacts selectively again. Due to Brownian motion, they'll collide and then, they're going to bind onto this bioagent. Now that happened, that actually changes the electric field on that transducer. So now you measure what that signal is. You pump it through a calibration curve and bam, now you can measure the concentration in your body. How we do that in this industry is for CGMs, you use something called glucose oxidase. Generally how this works, you put this into a hydrogel, coat that on a wire. And what that does, it will oxidize beta glucose, specifically the beta glucose conformation of glucose, turn it into gluconolactone, and one of those byproducts is hydrogen peroxide. So now, hydrogen peroxide, because you painted this on a wire, the generation of hydrogen peroxide will change the voltage on that wire. The voltage on the wire that indicates the rate of oxidation, and then you can just take it through a calibration curve, like I said, and you have your glucose reading from there. Phew. All right. Okay, we're gonna go back. So these next two slides, I'm gonna just flip through them real quick. They're mostly for people that want to review. I'm gonna go through this one by one. Okay, so again, the first lesson here. Notice what was the metaphor that I used? I compared blood to a bowl of chili. The fact that, hey, there's a lot of stuff you can put into chili, right? And the difficulty of like, well, I want to unmake the chili now and then just get out one thing. Like it's hard. So the idea is I tied it to something that most people are familiar with. And then that is a metaphor that you can use across the board, across all like, I guess, technical abilities to kind of help solidify your point. And in fact, what I do, I just take that metaphor and that's the first thing I do, right? So let's go back here. Yeah. So you want to also go over yeah, and then the whole idea of like, okay, so if we make the pepper glow in the dark, can we make it easier? Fun fact, back when I was doing this in my previous job, we did make it glow in the dark. We were using very high powered lasers to do this. Fun times. So it's not just a contrived metaphor, which is always good. You want to have a metaphor that you can relate to yourself, right? Because you're going to be the one talking about it. Well, okay, I actually have to review this. All right. Yeah. So now in the non-technical case, I stop at that metaphor. I use that metaphor to describe the problem. And were I to go on with this talk, I would keep referring to that metaphor. For a technical conversation, I would just use it as a springboard. Just use that to like, hey, here's how it works. Here's how difficult the problem is. But there's other things you can do. And that's kind of the trajectory that I took. Oh yeah, talk. Yeah, okay. The other lesson here is notice the usage of jargon. Now, a lot of people will just blanketly say, hey, don't use any jargon in your talk. It's bad. Jargon is great. It is dense, it is precise. It conveys a very specific meaning with just one word. And that is very, very useful as a communicator, as you might imagine. But the thing is, like, for people that aren't in your field and they aren't exposed to all of the jargon of your field, then they're going to absolutely despise the fact that you're throwing this at them. So you want to use this strategically. For a talk aimed at the general audience, I would say 3, lower, fewer than 3 even, total throughout the entire talk. And you want to choose them strategically, you want to choose them strategically so that you can use that to teach something. So for example, in glucose sensing, I should probably add the context. Previous job before I was at Machine Cognita, where I was working on CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors. And you use GOX a lot. That was in fact the base. That is in fact the basis of all glucose sensing technology. Because that's important, and because I know, like, I didn't hear about it until I got in. Probably it's a good idea to. That'll be one of the jargons that I introduce. That's going to be when I teach. Enzyme is going to have to also be one of those things that I teach because GOX is an enzyme. Going to have to teach them those 2 things. Already 2 jargons are used up. Now I have maybe one more thing I could use. And that's kind of the strategy here. Pick and choose so that you can use that to explain something very specific. Okay. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I have to mention, we don't actually check the blood. You check the interstitial fluid. I just had to put that in there because this used to be my job, right? Okay. Moving on to the next question. Okay, so that was all of the review. We're going to go back to the theory hatch now. Wrap up with the other 5 Ys, 5 Ws. Remember that was just the who, right? Okay, so what, when, and where. Lesson here: handle your logistics at a time. Know when to show up. Show up early. You know what they say: early is on time is late. If you are late, you're going to be very nervous. And if you're nervous already, because you should be, because you're public speaking, that is extremely unhelpful. Yeah, just get that handled. And of course, you want to know, hey, what is the tone? What is the vibe of it? Conferences are not the same as workshops, and they're not the same as like talks with your friends. And the only way to know how to do that sort of code switching is to see it happen. Definitely, if you want to do SciComm, then you're going to want to hear and read a lot of SciComm, is the idea. Okay, the final W in this list is that, hey, you want to explicitly state to yourself why you are giving this talk. And if the reason that you're at this conference, if the reason that you're at whatever event is, hey, my PI told me to do it, yes, that can be true. That can be true. That is fine. I understand. But you want to create something more than that. Consider that you are in that position because you have something to share that someone else doesn't have. you want to explicitly put down in writing or say aloud to someone. You want to make that real what that reason is. And then you want to know also why the audience is there too. If you know what the explicit purpose of this event is, then you'll also know why the audience is here, and that'll also help craft your speech. Okay, whew. Stretch out, move around a little bit because we're going to get into the actual nuts and bolts of writing a presentation. This idea I call the narrative trajectory. Again, opening with another quote. All right. Somebody gets into trouble, then gets out of it again. People love that story. They never get tired of it. That was by Kurt Vonnegut. He's right. Stories kind of all follow the same structure, and then really there's only one story that's ever been told in all of human history, and it goes something like this. Hi, meet our hero. They're over there. They're really cool. It's awesome. They're great people. Oh, but over there, those guys, they're gross and they're weird, and oh my goodness, and we don't like them. They must be the bad guy. Oh, why would they do this to the bad guy? Oh, to the good guy. Oh, why all the humanity? Thank goodness violence was invented. We're going to do it on their stupid faces. Then everyone lived happily ever after. Until, there's a sequel or a prequel or a reboot. Everyone, is such a classic and great story. So great that we spend literal billions of dollars collectively as a society watching and reading the story play out over and over again. So this 5-act structure is not the only way to tell a story, of course. And it's also not the only way to do science communication, but it's the one that we're going to go over because, hey, number one, borrow from good storytelling, because science communication is storytelling. I'm going to say that again. Science communication is storytelling. In fact, all communication is storytelling, actually. And you want to keep the sentence, the presentation structure simple, or the writing structure simple for science communication, because your job is to science communicate. You will be wowing your audience, you'll be entertaining, but at the same time, there are things that you want to teach. And if your story structure is like Inception or the Marvel MCU with branching timelines, it's gonna detract from what you want to teach. So keep it simple. We are, for the purpose of this talk, like I said, this isn't the only way to do this, but it is one of the ways to do this, and is a good way to do this. We're going to adapt this 5-act structure into something slightly more SciComm oriented. It goes something like this. Here's a scientific problem that you're going to want to care about. I care about it a lot, so let me tell you about it. But within this field, there's a really big problem that we need to solve. This is what that looks like. And here's what it looks like solving. Oh, incredible. I'm going to tell you about how to solve this. I've actually been working on this research. Wow, oh my goodness. Here's a bunch of fancy graphs that tell you that does work. Wonderful times. And then we're going to recap everything and go through all of the 4 previous acts again, telling you, hey, here was the problem, why you cared about it. Here's kind of like the really big problem that we're trying to solve. Wow, I'm solving it right now. And it works. Thank you. Welcome to our TED Talk. Joke's on you. It's all TED Talks with me. Hold on. Oh, yeah. Okay. So one point I want to mention. When I say narrative trajectory, I do mean like a physical trajectory. It's a pathway that you walk down. If you guys are familiar with the idea of the memory palace, and that is this concept where of memorizing things, where you walk through a literal palace in your mind, of course, you're imagining this, but it feels like you're walking through this thing and you're putting facts and ideas in specific places, much the same idea. You want to be able to, as you're telling a story, you yourself have to be walking through this pathway, and that's how you want to think about this. Okay, we're going to do another example. We're going to switch this up a little bit. I'm going to show you kind of how this works before we move on. Kind of to illustrate the point, and also as like a personal challenge, it was kind of fun. Maybe you guys should do this too. There's going to be one slide for every act. That's just going to pinpoint kind of the ideas. Now, normally, mind you, these should be more than one slide piece, right? And in fact, in reality, they're probably going to be, but just for the sake of what we're doing today, it's just going to be one slide per act. Okay, so the paper here is highest fusion performance without harmful edge energy bursts in tokamak. I honestly literally just searched up, hey, nuclear fusion is cool. What's Google Scholar? Tell me what's going on. Found this paper and I was like, sick, this sounds great. We're going to talk about it today. All right. Imagine squeezing a water balloon, like just really hard. You have a water balloon and you're trying to squeeze it as hard as you can. So now it's your fingers as gaps, right? You're going to have water escaping through your fingers, and it's just going to end up being wet. But here's the thing: the sun does that all the time, and in fact, that is why it is hot. That is why things are bright. That is why the sun shines. It is squeezing a balloon of hydrogen. Uh, because of the immense gravity, it is superheated, and then it turns into hot gas known as plasma. Um, and the thing about smashing hydrogen together, it produces a lot of energy. The sun is shining right now. In fact, it looks like the clouds just broke over here. Um, and the thing is, if we could do that same process on Earth, that would transform our economy because there's a lot of energy that you can pry out from just even a glass's worth of water. It's about 20 gallons of gasoline that you can get worth of energy using nuclear fusion. So now the sun makes it look easy because the sun has extreme gravity. When you're trapped in like the core of the sun where all this happens, there's nowhere for you to go. There are no gaps between fingers with gravity. It's just everywhere. And that immense pressure and heat like heats it up to 15 million degrees Celsius. We generally on Earth don't like things to be on fire. So we don't have the advantage of all this immense gravity. We also like not being pancakes. So what we do is we have high-powered magnets arranged in a big donut shape, kind of, and you're seeing the inside of this here. And as you can imagine, like trying to squeeze a water balloon with your hands, that's what we're doing with magnets. So it's very hard to do. And any sort of misstep in that, you're going to just have hot gas flying around everywhere. You're going to fry your magnets. Very, very bad times. You will get what's called containment failure. That plasma that's existing in this donut, which we call the tokamak. If that bursts out, well, now you have hot gas, and now your multi-million-dollar piece of equipment is trashed. Very bad times. So the idea is you can correct for something called the error field. So the gaps between your fingers, like I was talking about, you can consider that to be the error field. The idea is that any little asymmetry, because the sun isn't really asymmetric, any little problems with that field shape, you're going to have a bad time. So one of the ways we can get around that, well, we have these gigantic intermagnets. If you look into this picture again, all those panels, those are covering heat shielding and then also very powerful magnets behind them. But the cool thing is you can have very powerful magnets on the outside, because what happens is as the plasma gets contained and swirling around this donut, you'll eventually, you're going to have to deal with some level of containment failure because this is just a hard problem. But you just don't want it to touch the outside of the donut. Well, the inner outside part of the donut, right? So if you have big arrays of another magnets on the outside, that kind of pushes and guides it away. And that's something that's called error field correction. And the cool thing is you can tell AI to do this. Not ChatGPT, of course, because that ChatGPT is meant to be a chatbot, but a custom designed AI that takes in all of the physics equations that are used that are kind of govern this plasma physics. And then you can have it just learn and eat through a lot of the data that gets pumped out of your tokamak. And then you can find a great way to control those magnets using AI. Because the more stable your plasma is, the better containment is going to be. And now we can actually start thinking about using this in a reactor, because that is the problem of fusion energy. All right, to wrap up, fusion energy, like it is kind of going to have to be the next leap. We need an energy source that is emissions free. But this is a hard problem. You have to do what the sun is doing every day and somehow replicate that here. We have learned that you can use external magnets around the tokamak, not just the ones to control the plasma, but around the reactor itself to prevent internal damage. And you can use AI to really fine tune in real time all of the magnetic fields and control that so that you don't damage your reactor. We've tested this on a reactor, and this is a very promising method to control fusion energy. Thank you again for coming to my TED Talk. Okay. Theory hat, sorry, demonstration hat, lessons hat off. Okay, so thank you. 2 out of 2 times. The metaphor came out immediately. That is something you want to do because that you want to give something for people to grab onto. And then you can springboard off of that to whatever degree of complexity you need. The other thing, like I said before, when picking your jargon, you want to do that strategically. This talk was aimed at for people, general audience. General audience typically means someone who's graduated high school. Even though your audience may have or may be in college, you actually want to step maybe one notch down below that, just to help people, guide along. Because if you lose anybody in any part of the process, they're gone. They're for the rest of the talk. So it's better to be a little gracious and give them a little bit more information. In the idea here, there's a few things that we needed to explain. Error field. That was what this paper was about. So not going to get away without teaching that. So that's one jargon down. The whole idea of like, hey, fusion happens. So notice how if you have any background in nuclear physics, notice how I didn't mention anything about mass energy and something like that, because that would take away from the time. I only had 5 slides here. So while I am not presenting the full truth of what's going on here, it's a lie of omission, not like I'm like straight up lying. There was a necessary one because now we're going to be stuck on people asking questions like, well, why is mass energy a thing? What is this weird physics that people have spent decades trying to understand that we still don't? Because that's not the point of the talk. The point of the talk is, hey, giant flipping magnets outside your donut, very good. Fusion energy, nice. That was the message, right? Let's go. Yeah. Of course, you're probably gonna need to explain what plasma is. People have probably heard plasma before. Maybe they've heard it in a medical context, like blood plasma, which is not at all the same, right? So definitely, yeah, it's a hot guess. Good enough explanation. Notice also I didn't talk about the differences between fusion and fission. It's not even worth the time because you're talking about fusion, maybe in a longer conversation over 10 minutes, where one of the slides would be, hey, here's what our energy, here's where all of our energy comes from. Notice how I caught myself. Maybe some of you guys I was about to say energy mix, which is the idea of like, hey, which is, where our energy comes from. Hey, here's where our energy comes from. All of this sucks because it's throwing carbon into the air. Fusion, great. Didn't even have that conversation. Again, just because of constraints in time, just because of constraints in human intention, and because I knew the critical thing to take away here, error field control, using AI to do that. That was the idea. And again, the jargon there was used strategically to build up to that whole idea, is how that goes. Okay, all right, we're almost done. We're going to talk about just tips and tricks. Unfortunately, in an hour, you're not going to be able to cover everything you need to learn. That's just not going to happen. But maybe I could leave you guys with, okay, here's some theory. And then there's going to be times where especially when you're first learning something, it's going to feel like I have to do it this way because that's how I learned it. That's not true. And you're going to, and the only way to learn when to like why something works is to just kind of do it yourself. That's what this quote's about. I'm going to read it. He places theory within the category of rules to which there can be exceptions, not laws that allow none. This was John Lewis Gaddis. He is fairly U.S. military guy, strategist, talking about Karl von Clausewitz, who was a Prussian military strategist, and talking about, hey, there's a place for theory, which I gave you a lot of theory today. But realize that ultimately, once you know all this stuff, you just kind of have to put your boots on the ground and just kind of do it over a bunch. And hopefully these tips and tricks will kind of help you out. Okay, PowerPoint slides. You're going to use PowerPoint slides, so let's just kind of figure out how to deal with that. All right. First tip, if you read word for word, you will hit red lights at every intersection for the next 3 weeks for every word you read. It is a curse. I am cursing you with it right now. Do not read word for word off of PowerPoint slides. That being said, notice how I literally just read off word for word off of this PowerPoint slide, right? So I want to tell you the difference between reading word for word and just reciting what is on, actually reciting what is on that bullet point. And the difference is how you carry yourself. What often happens when you're very nervous, and I've seen this a lot, and you've probably seen this a lot too, you will find escape in the words because they're there, they're in front of you, they're solid, they're not going to throw any weird curveballs at you. So people will start reading it word for word. That's not what you want to do. If you do need to read something, it still has to be from you, not from the slides. And you'll be able to see the difference in their body language, how like kind of how they carry themselves, the you know, just the, I guess, raw charisma of it. Only way to do that is practice, unfortunately. Okay, so if you have, next tip, if you have pictures in a slide, it has to be explained. People will pick you apart for like, hey, what is this picture? They're going to ask about that picture if you don't explain it. If you don't want to explain it, don't put it in. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the effort. Sometimes B-roll is fine. If you're not familiar with the term B-roll, it is a term used in the entertainment industry. Usually it's like, it's stock footage. For example, let's say, oh, here's a beer commercial, and here's generic footage of people drinking this beer and just having a good time on the beach. That is B-roll. It's a bunch of things. It's not like truly meaningful to what you're doing. But some case it's fine. Especially in an introduction slide, you're gonna want some kind of pictures, right? Pictures are nice. With the glucose example, I had a picture of a finger prick glucose meter. And again, notice how I explained what that is. But it is B-roll, and that in itself isn't like a significant part of it. It's okay. It's okay to do. If you need B-roll, go to unsplash.com. This place has a lot of pictures that people have put up for free use. You can just download it and put it in your presentations, search up whatever you need. That's what I did for that picture. Great, wonderful website. Use it in other presentations as well. Now, next one. When you're making a PowerPoint presentation or even writing something, even writing a paper, I usually start with the critical pictures first. Part of, again, the 5-act structure for science that I went over today. Again, not the only one, the one we went over. There was that section graphs. You want to put those in because that's going to, because that's as a scientist, that's really what your bread and butter is, right? You spent all this time making this pretty picture. You're going to want to explain that pretty picture. Your whole job is, in a sense, going to be getting people to the point where they can understand that pretty picture. And like I said, if you're writing, that's actually how I do it first. I use in that narrative trajectory, like I said, imagine physically walking through this path. The path markers are these pictures. That's how to do it. Also has the benefit of like, hey, if you know what that path looks like in terms of pictures, then you don't have to memorize things that you're going to say because that's something you want to avoid. Okay, nervousness. Specifically on nervousness. Okay, so you might have heard this cliche, it never really goes away. It doesn't. I thought I was writing this, I was like, oh, I'll be fine. I'm doing this for a while. And then finally, when I logged into the Zoom and I saw people's faces that I've never seen before, I was like, oh crap, okay, it's getting real. Oh my goodness. Now imagine this fact. You are nervous because you care. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be nervous. And the only way to kind of get used to that and used to with yourself is just to practice. There's unfortunately no other way around it. If you want to share something, share it and get used to just doing that. That's unfortunately, that's all there is to it. There's no tips, there's no workshop, there's nothing else that can help that for you, unfortunately. When you practice, practice as you intend on presenting. So go through the presentation as if you're actually going to present it. If you're very nervous, do that a little bit more. And don't cram, by the way. Don't do it right before. If you know you're going to be nervous, or if you know you're doing this for the first time, giving a presentation, start that process at least. Start the process of practicing at least a week before. Number one, you're going to find things you're going to want to fix in your slides. And also, two, you want to be able to get that narrative trajectory solid in your head. Oh, fun, another just tip. If you run out of people to practice on because you've been practicing on them so much and they're sick of you, they want you to go away, stuffed animals are great. Line them up on a couch or on your bed or something like that, and then give it to them as if they're a live audience. Oh, yes, I've mentioned this a lot. I'm going to mention this for the upteenth time. Narrative is a path. You want to imagine walking down a literal path. That knowing where to walk, that is how you avoid just reading from the slides word for word. And that's going to really be your anchor for any sort of nerves that you may have. Yeah, your tour guide, show them cool stuff that you're doing. All right, and I think that's it. Oh, wow. Wow, there's a wrapping up slide. Who'd have thought? I told you to have a conclusion. Now there's a concluding slide. Okay, we're going to go through everything. Again, meta level conversation. When you're going through your conclusion slide, you're going to want to start from the beginning, go through a very abridged version of the tour. What that looked like was, hey, your 5 W's, who, what, when, where, why, figure out who your audience is, figure out your logistics, all that kind of stuff. You want to know that all that information is going to tell you how to set the tone. What is your floor for vocabulary? Again, remember, no fewer than 3 jargons. I'd say that rule is true even if you are talking to a technically minded audience of peers. I wouldn't add more than 3 new jargons is how I would put it. Because they should already be very familiar. You shouldn't have to throw in new jargon. Anyway, what'll help people understand a very complex topic is to take a central metaphor, use it throughout the entire talk. And of course, start with that metaphor. You immediately ground them into something that's very familiar with them. And then of course, if you want to do this, you just got to do it. Practice, practice, practice. Like I said, get some friends together, talk about something cool, do what I did, like the 5-slide challenge or whatever. Just take a paper and be like, oh, this sounds pretty sick. Can we break this down? Or even just go through the practice of like, what would a metaphor for this be? Because that's a creative muscle that you're just going to have to train. So now that being said, if you do want an opportunity to practice, again, if you're in the Southern California area, Brain Public, the group that I run with my partner, we operate out of the patio of a local pizza shop right by UCI. And there, it's a very low impact thing. I'll host an interview about the scientists. They'll talk about what they do. It's not even scientists, in fact. We've had a philosopher and a historian come by. But anything technical that you want to share with others, and people are hungry for this stuff. That's something I should mention, by the way. People want to know things because knowing things is kind of cool. There's a lot of cool stuff going on, so keep that in mind that you should definitely take the opportunity to do that. This is for the general public, by the general public. It's very casual. You don't have to prep much. There's no like slides to do. There's also pizza and beer involved. So hey, if you're ever in the Orange County area, the website rainpublic.com is where to go to check us out. And again, if you want the practice too. That's about all I have for today. Hopefully I left enough time for, oh, I did not. Hopefully I left some time for Q&A. And I guess I'll just open the floor with that. Thank you for all the time that you've given me so far.
Thank you so much. As a visual learner, I 100% like loved all the images and the metaphors. I was like, oh yeah, the sun, it's really hot. We don't want that on Earth. So how can we fix it? So it was really, really helpful. And thank you so much. I know that it's almost 10 o'clock. So if participants, if you need to go, totally fine. But if you have another, 10, 15 minutes and you want to ask questions, please stick around. So with that, any questions from anyone or advice that you need? Let's see. Okay, we have one in the chat from
Okay, I'll open that
Anna.
up.
Great talk. Thank you very much. You used humor well in your examples. Do you have advice on how to use humor successfully in presentations?
Yeah, so a lot of that is going to come with, I'll put it this way. So you can write jokes into your presentation. In fact, I do. Like for example, like, hey, we like things to not be on fire. That like, I actually wrote that in. That's perfectly fine. In fact, all comedy routines are, that are written in. And then they do a very good job of like trying to give the impression, oh, I'm just naturally funny and I came up with that on the spot. That's no, it's all scripted. That's perfectly fine. The other thing you can do is with practice is the only way you're going to be able to find your voice. And from it's from there that you're going to be able to come up with what you want to speak. That's how I would go about it. Think about all the stuff you want to talk about first, and then start injecting some of that in if you think it's funny. That's the idea.
Excellent. So we have some
Thank you.
comments. Great in-depth presentation. Thank you for your talk. Makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? Or is anyone, oh, we have one here. How to start with a picture when there's a definite structure format for the presentations?
Just to clarify, do you mean that, hey, this specific talk style has a very specific format, and then they want you to do it a specific way? Is that what you mean? Because if that's true, then yeah, you're gonna want to throw the structure out the window and go with the structure that that they want you to do. But okay, so let me try to answer this question this way. I think if we go back a bunch, you know what? Maybe don't do that. Maybe do this. I didn't mean to stop screen share. Okay. Give me 1 second. Let me bring that back. Okay, so this slide is just a picture, right? So how I did this here is that I knew I was going here. Again, I organized the presentation with the pictures first. So I knew I was gonna lead up to this point. So I set people up a little bit so then I could just kind of play around in the space, and that mentality is how I think about it. So setting up a sandbox is the idea. And again, that's all gonna be like, yeah, you want to plan out like, okay, so I've given them all the little bits and pieces of information they're gonna need. And now we're gonna be in this little sandbox. I'm gonna build like a, tiny little sandcastle for you. Let's take a look at it. let me describe it to you. Let me describe the process. Let me describe to you all the little cool little things that are going on here. Is how that's how I do it.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up? All right. Ted, do you do coaching? Like if
I
like
do.
scholars
Yes.
are interested in maybe getting advice or if they're preparing for a presentation, can they come to you and book a consultation?
Yeah. So I haven't done so I do have a consulting firm. I don't want to charge exorbitant sums of money for people that want to do this. Um, I don't quite have a plan for any of that yet, unfortunately. But yes, hey, if you want advice, if you want help on your talk, just reach out. I'm not gonna like again, I'm not gonna be mean to you. I'll put it that way.
Okay, perfect. We do have another question from Shavinti, I hope. Thanks so much for the talk. Do you have any tips when it comes to interdisciplinary science communication, where science meets humanities, that sort of thing?
Mhm. Okay. So these events are great. Because now uh again, because you're going to be talking to smart people that have even less of a scientific background than you might expect, right? So now the challenge is you number one, you're gonna have to lean on your metaphor um a little bit more in these sorts of talks. Actually, I'm gonna take that back. If you approach these sorts of events as if you're talking to a broad and general audience, regardless of how educated they are, because there's going to be a lot of situations that are like that. In fact, Brain Public is like that. Being literally down the street from a R1 institution, you get a lot of very high-powered nerds, smart folk that come by that have PhDs and stuff like that, not in science. So they're all very smart. And then you have people that like just have a day job. We have a bunch of people that are like, I'm a barista. That's what I do. Um, the approach is going to be the same there. Start with a central metaphor, regardless of the structure, and then just use that to build up more and more complex issues, more and more complex topics.
Mm, thank you. All right.
This was very helpful for me, gave me a great refresher. In grad school, I did a lot, our whole class, our cohort did a lot of practice on cool topics, cool papers. So it was nice to remember that. And I have a unscripted, scripted talk later
Sure.
today. So it was very nice to sort of like get the nerves out, practice again. Yeah, things like
Glad
that.
to be
Thank you
helpful.
so much. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. We really appreciate you guys. As we always say, this is a networking opportunity. So amazing, amazing insight and actionable and practical tips. So thank you, Ted. But it's also an opportunity to remember everyone in this room, grab their name, search for them on LinkedIn, and build your network. So thank you so much. Have
Yes,
a
thank
great
you, everyone.
day.
Thank you, folks. Thank you for your
Thank you,
time.
Ted.
Again,
Cool.
reach out if you have any questions.
Yeah. I'm gonna probably check out a Brain Public event sometime soon.
Please do. Please drop on by.